Hey friends, thanks for coming back to the channel. I appreciate you sticking it out with me. As you probably have figured out, most of these videos are basically me just kind of showing off some of the things that I've been doing with code as a digital portfolio, if you will, with the express intent of hopefully getting people to notice some of the cool stuff that I can do, but also to just kind of share it with the world as well. I know there's a lot of people like myself, for instance, who sometimes run into issues creating things with code. And I want to be able to kind of help people out with some of the things that, I mean, if it's a hang up that I've had, then I'm sure somebody else has had the same hang up. So in this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at C++ and specifically something called OpenGL. For those of you that don't know, it's called Open Graphics Library. And there is a really great tutorial online. It's called Learn OpenGL. So if you haven't been to it yet, I would definitely go to that and check it out. Most of this is going to skip over a lot of that stuff, and I'm going to hit more of the more convoluted things that they don't really teach you sometimes, or sometimes you don't really get a chance to learn unless you are kind of shown how it's done. And I was not, so I had to figure a lot of this out on my own. So hopefully it can help you out. So check it out. This was a program that I got from one of my professors in one of my CS classes, CS 330, Computer Graphics and Visualizations. And originally the program started out as a lot more convoluted than this over here on the left-hand side. This is the main program, and it actually started out with a little bit more, um, I guess, kind of messier, if you could call it that. And I feel like I cleaned it up a lot more. The main method was pretty small, but all of the methods that the program used were all contained within this one program here on the left-hand side. And I wasn't a big fan of that. I think I like things a little bit more modular, and I really like things to be encapsulated. So if you're not sure what that means, it's basically the idea that object-oriented programming tackles in that it breaks the program up into smaller modules, and each one of those modules is kind of independent of the others in that they don't really know what each one is doing. They all just kind of work together. So you're sending information from one module to the next, and that module that receives the information will do something with that information, but it's kind of unknown about the rest of the program. Like the rest of the program doesn't really know what that module is doing, and vice versa. It's kind of up to the user to help them talk to one another. It's probably a gross oversimplification, and I'm sure there's better ways to explain it out there, but maybe if I show you kind of what this does or what I did with it. So what this program actually does is it draws shapes. That's the idea. It opens up a window that's 1920 by 1080, and then it draws shapes within it that you can interact with. All right. What I decided to do was with OpenGL, you'll learn a little bit more about this if you go to the open or learnopengl.com website. But what I decided to do with this was make it more modular in that instead of everything being done within this one main CPP file, I decided to break it up so that the information was being passed back and forth. Like I said, a little bit more modular. So in order to do that, first and foremost, I made an object of type, or actually it's more of a struct type of GL mesh. And this GL mesh contains all of this information right here, all these different things. Now these can be modified as the user needs them. And I'll explain what each one of these are in like future videos and what some of them do. But for the most part, everything that the other parts of the program need is going to be found within these GL mesh objects. So every time I create a GL mesh object, I make sure that I like basically give each one of these variables that's instantiated, I give them a value so that when they get passed, or when the GL mesh object gets passed to the appropriate module, that module can do with it what it needs to do. All right, so basically this whole program is designed, and again, you can use this if you want to for your own classes or whatever it is that you're doing. Basically, this whole program here doesn't need to be touched at all. This whole thing that I have labeled as 5.3 texturing pyramid, I guess that's what the assignment was at this time. This whole program doesn't need to be touched. The only part that you might want to do some touching would be if you wanted to change the background, and that's right here in the first, in the main method. But other than that, anything else you want to do, you don't have to touch it at all. I have encapsulated into these two different classes. One of them is called Shape Builder, and the other one is called Scene Builder. And they both work hand in hand with, of course, the main program. But again, you don't have to touch it. They both work hand in hand to draw shapes. All right, so let me show you how it works. So in the Shape Builder, I have a variety of different methods that are all designed to build different types of shapes. So like this first one, Shape Builder, build pyramid. You build pyramid. This is going to build a pyramid, and it's got 8 values to it. It's got, or sorry, 9 values to it. It's got the vertex positions right here, the first 3. The next 4 are going to be the color coordinates, and then the last 2 are going to be the texture coordinates. Now you may notice some weird numbers here, 0.625f and 1.0f. I'll talk more about those in a future video as well when I cover textures. For right now, I'm just kind of explaining how this works. So anyway, so that's like that's building a regular pyramid. And this is under the assumption that it's going to be using specific textures. And these colors here, I'll talk about that as well. But then just below it, I have another one. This is You Build Rainbow Pyramid. And this pyramid is designed to create random colors on the pyramid. So it's still going to build a pyramid. It's still going to use, you can see the same coordinates over here, vertex positions, these first 3. But then for the colors, it's going to create random floats for each one of the colors. And that is going to, or for each one of the RGB portions of the color spectrum. And then that's going to make that vertex a random color. Okay, so that's your user build rainbow, or You Build Rainbow Pyramid. All of these, all the shapes that are in here work kind of the same way. So again, here's You Build a Cube. So this is if you're going to build like a cube type shape in your scene. And then this is building a rainbow cube. And then down here, I have a cone. And I'll talk more about this algorithm in a future video as well. But as you can see, the cone is a little bit more complex. It requires a triangle fan on the bottom. And then, of course, I've got side triangles that I'll point up. And we'll see what that looks like when I run the program. And there's a rainbow version as well. And then I also have a cylinder in here. And the cylinder, again, a more complex algorithm that builds a triangle fan on the top and bottom. And then it also builds sides that are also made of triangles, which we'll see what that looks like. And, of course, a rainbow cylinder as well. And then down here at the bottom, I've got a plane, so you can just have a flat surface to put everything on. And then a couple of the random shapes down below, but these are the ones that we're going to look at mostly. So that's what I've got here. And now this class shape builder gets its information in the form of a GL mesh, which I just call a mesh. Okay, and this GL mesh gets passed to this class from my original, or sorry, I shouldn't say my original, my main portion of the program that the user would interact with, which is right here, my SceneBuilder.cpp. Now the SceneBuilder class, this is where the user goes to basically do all of the things that they need to do in order to build the shapes. So let's kind of run through this real quick. And all these things up here, I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in detail in future videos, but like especially like this texture stuff and like where all these things come from. But for right now, let's just take a look at this very first one right here. So what I'm doing, this is, for instance, right here, this is going to build a pyramid. And so to build that pyramid, first I'm going to declare an object of GL mesh. I'm just going to call it gmesh03. Now each gmesh has a properties vector, and that properties vector contains the first 4 are the colors, RGB and then alpha. The next 3 values are going to be the scale, X, Y, and Z. So if you change these numbers, it's going to change the scale of this pyramid in this case, in that particular axis. The next ones, the next 3, are going to be the amount of rotation. The first value is going to be based off of a 360-degree scale, and then the next 3 are just there to show which axes the rotation is happening in. I did this on purpose. I know there's like a better way that's more concise that does like basically has the one value for the rotation, and of course it has all of these different, it has all this in one line. But I separated it out because I thought, what if I wanted to change it 45 degrees in the y-axis, but 10 degrees in the x-axis and 100 degrees in the z-axis? How do I do that separately? And I found this to be a pretty easy way to just send that information. Now, I'm sure there's a better way out there, but this is what I came up with. And then finally, this second to last one is going to be the translation of where it's going to be moving in relation to the origin 0, 0, 0. So in this case, it's going to be moving that pyramid negative 1.5 to the left down the x-axis. And then this last 2, it's not labeled, but this is for the texture, and this is texture scaling. So I keep it at 1, but if you wanted to make the texture smaller on the shape that you're building, or larger, you would change these values. Okay, and then down here, I'm telling the pyramid how high it needs to be. So I'm putting it at 0.8. So that's going to help it render how tall it needs to be. This is the texture that I'm going to be using. It's called bricks.png. And I'll explain this define texture thing in a little bit. And then here is where I tell the gmesh03, the GL mesh object, what texture to use. So the text file name is going to be basically the folder location of where that texture picture is and the texture itself. Now I put this in here, this concat macro. This is so that when I export this as a .exe, somebody else can open it up on their computer and they won't have to have this texture file on their computer in this particular location. This basically embeds it within the .exe. So I thought that was a nice feature for, like, you know, if you want to just pass it along to somebody else without having to give them all this stuff to go along with it. And then I just call the ShapeBuilder class and I tell it I'm going to use uBuildPyramid and I'm going to send it the GMesh03. No other extra stuff, no height, no radius, no width, no properties, colors, nothing like that. This is just a nice, clean, easy way. Just send it the GMesh3. And then I put everything into what's called a scene, a vector called scene, and I push it back. And that's it. And so all of these shapes here, this next one is a cube. This one after this is, or that one after the cube is going to be, this one's a cone, as you can see here. This one down here is going to be a cylinder. Every single one of these gets pushed back into the scene vector. And then that scene vector is what is ultimately run by this texturing a pyramid class here, the main program. Okay, so once it runs through it, it's basically going to, you can see it right here, uRender, that's going to be my rendering method, and it's going to pass that scene. And that scene is going to be passed to the render method, and the render method runs through the vector scene, and it renders every single one of these shapes one at a time, and then outputs them onto the screen. So let's take a look at kind of what this looks like, so you can kind of see it in action. And we're going to run it. And if we did everything right, it should show a pyramid on the screen and a cube and a cylinder, and oh, there we go. That's it. That's it. And so you can see you can also interact with the scene as well. It's got up and down. It's got left, right, forward, backward. You can kind of increase the speed and decrease the speed as you go through if you want. And of course, mouse movement is also supported. And then one other feature that I put in here is that if you press the arrows left and right, you can go from solid to wireframe. And so in the wireframe, you can kind of see how, like, the cylinder, for instance, is made of a variety of different triangles, all their vertices in different parts. You can see the triangle fan at the bottom of the cone. You can see how the cube is made of various triangles as well. And they're all sitting on a plane, which is made up of 4 triangles, all positioned next to one another. So bring those back solid. And there you go. And that is my OpenGl program. Now you may notice with my cube, for instance, my cube has a different texture for each one of its 6 sides. And you may notice that the cylinder is wrapped appropriately with this rock pattern here that I got off the internet. And then at the top, the rock pattern is the same as what's on the bottom here. It's not fanned out. And you can see that the texture wraps correctly around the cone and wraps correctly around the pyramid. And I'm going to talk about how I did all those things in a future video, because texturing can be a little bit of a pain and it can be kind of confusing at first. And the OpenGl, learnopengl.com website is really helpful. But if you want to get into more advanced stuff, like, again, showing this cube with a different texture on each side, that is, for me, it was a little bit trickier. So I'm going to show you how all that works in future videos, but hopefully this is kind of a cool thing to pique your interest. And again, if you want to use this program in your own program, feel free to go ahead and do so. Download it from my GitHub and use it in good health. All right, so with that, hope you had an awesome time watching that video, and look forward to seeing you in the next one.